I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. The morning began like any other. Claire and I shared the usual hurried routine, trading glances over coffee and rushing the kids out the door. It was an unremarkable Thursday morning, the kind where everything falls into a predictable rhythm. But when Claire left for her business trip, I noticed something that tugged at the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. As I went through my day, I kept thinking about the rush of her departure, the almost practiced way she said goodbye. It wasn't new for her to travel. She had a solid job at a marketing firm, managing accounts across state lines. Still, the way she held herself lately, as though she was carrying a weight she couldn't share, gave me a sense of unease I hadn't felt before. Trying to shake it off, I decided it was my mind playing tricks on me. Marriage comes with ebbs and flows, I reminded myself. Maybe this was just one of them. But later that morning, as I went to tidy up the kitchen, her purse caught my eye. Claire was meticulous about her things, rarely leaving personal items out of place. But this morning, she'd left her purse out on the counter, as though she was in too much of a hurry to stow it properly. I knew I shouldn't pry, yet I couldn't resist the temptation to peek inside. Maybe it was some part of me searching for reassurance, wanting to prove that my concerns were unfounded. Inside, nestled among the usual essentials, I found something that felt like a slap to the face, a small, wrapped packet of protection. We hadn't used that in years. We had 2 kids, and our intimate life had settled into a routine where protection wasn't necessary. My chest tightened as I held the packet, the edges digging into my palm. There was no innocent explanation for why she would need this. Suddenly, every small, offhand excuse she'd made about staying late, every unspecific detail about her trips, started swirling together into a sickening realization. I put the packet back, trying to still the tremor in my hand. Confronting her was the obvious next step, but as I stood there, I realized that I didn't want to give her an out just yet. What if she had an excuse, some half-baked explanation that would somehow justify what I'd found? I needed to be sure, to have concrete evidence that couldn't be twisted or denied. This wasn't something I could approach unprepared. I owed it to myself, and to our kids, to know the truth. Over the next few days, I became a stranger to myself. I started sifting through our bank records, tracing every odd expense and unexplained hotel charge. I stayed up late scrolling through her social media, looking for any subtle signs that might betray her carefully curated online life. I even checked her phone logs, noting numbers I didn't recognize and tracing their origins. One in particular, a Virginia area code, stood out. It appeared again and again, an ever-present shadow haunting her recent call history. Every time I stumbled on a new piece of evidence, it felt like a piece of my reality was splintering. Memories of moments we'd shared, times when I'd trusted her without question, became tainted by this doubt creeping into every corner of my mind. But instead of confronting her directly, I chose to let her actions reveal the truth. I would wait, gather more evidence, and only then, once the picture was undeniable, would I confront her. The weekend came, and I'd managed to hold myself together, burying the anger and confusion beneath a mask of normalcy. We went about our day as usual, with Claire none the wiser to my suspicions. Watching her laugh with the kids, talk animatedly about a new project at work, I felt a strange mix of betrayal and disbelief. How could she smile like that, act so effortlessly, when she was hiding something so monumental? On Monday, she left for another business trip, and I watched her drive away with a heavy heart. Once she was gone, I finally allowed myself to let go of the composure I'd held onto so tightly. My hands shook as I paced the house, the truth now looming too close to ignore. I sat down with her phone records once more, going over each detail until I could no longer deny the conclusion that was taking shape. That night, when she was supposedly away, I decided to test one last thing. I called the Virginia number, a plan forming in my mind as the phone rang. If the person on the other end picked up and it was what I suspected, then I would have the answer I'd been dreading. After a few rings, a man's voice answered. I froze, listening to the unfamiliar tone, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello," he said, sounding cautious. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. Finally, I managed a simple, "Wrong number," and hung up. But that brief exchange was enough. Hearing his voice felt like the final nail in the coffin. It was real, she was betraying me with someone else, someone who felt comfortable enough with her to answer her calls. I sat down, the weight of it all crashing over me. Our entire relationship, every memory, every promise, felt like it had been rewritten by this discovery. I spent that night awake, mapping out what I would do next. I couldn't simply confront her and let her talk her way out of it. I needed to regain control, to come up with a plan that would leave no room for manipulation or denial. The truth had shattered our life, but I wouldn't let her turn it into something I couldn't recover from. The house was silent as I sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows that seemed to mirror the heavy thoughts pressing down on me. Claire was still away on her business trip, and the truth had settled in, jagged and unrelenting. My mind raced, but I felt strangely calm, as if every feeling of betrayal, hurt, and anger had settled into a single, focused resolve. The next day, I went about the routine with the kids as though nothing had changed. I helped them with breakfast, packed their lunches, and drove them to school. They laughed in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my head. I felt a pang of guilt but pushed it aside. Right now, they needed normalcy, and I was going to protect them from the fallout of Claire's betrayal. Once I got home, I started mapping out my plan. I'd never been the confrontational type, and the idea of an explosive showdown with Claire didn't sit well with me. I needed something solid, something that would give me the upper hand, so she couldn't twist the narrative. This wasn't just about the infidelity anymore, it was about ensuring that I came out of this with my dignity and, more importantly, with my kids and our home intact. The first thing I did was reach out to a lawyer. Sitting in the office, surrounded by the sterile decor and the sound of shuffling papers, I felt a surreal sense of detachment, like I was watching someone else go through the motions. My lawyer, a calm, sharp-witted woman named Karen, listened carefully as I explained the situation, her expression never wavering. "So," she said, leaning forward with a pen poised over her notepad. "You want to proceed with a divorce but want to keep it under wraps until you've gathered enough evidence to ensure a favorable outcome." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief at her professionalism. I'd half expected judgment or pity, but Karen was all business, which was exactly what I needed. "You're doing the right thing by gathering evidence," she continued. "If we can demonstrate a pattern of infidelity, it will strengthen your position for custody and asset division. North Carolina law considers adultery as a factor in divorce, so if we can prove that, it will work to your advantage." Hearing her lay it all out in such straightforward terms gave me the clarity I'd been searching for. She handed me a list of suggestions: document everything, keep records, and most importantly, stay calm. I left her office feeling like I had a blueprint for the first time since this nightmare began. That evening, I started compiling a digital record of everything suspicious I'd found: phone logs, credit card statements, receipts, and even screenshots of some cryptic messages I'd noticed on her social media. Each piece of evidence felt like a stepping stone, leading me further down the path to taking back control of my life. Claire came home from her trip on Wednesday evening. I watched her pull into the driveway, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone as she sat in the car for a moment before finally stepping out. She walked through the front door with a tired smile, greeting the kids and asking about their day. I kept my distance, studying her every move, every word, every tiny detail she thought I wouldn't notice. As she came into the kitchen, she caught my eye and smiled. "Hey," she said, her voice light. "How's everything been?" "Same as usual," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just another busy week." She nodded, pouring herself a glass of water and looking around as if searching for something. The room felt tense, the weight of my knowledge pressing down on me, but she seemed oblivious. I watched her closely, noticing how she avoided my gaze just a little too often, how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was as if I were looking at a stranger. Over the next few days, I continued observing her, pretending everything was fine while she went about her routine as if nothing had changed. But each time she left for a late night out with friends or another work meeting, I documented every moment. I watched her interactions with the kids, her practiced smiles, her rehearsed laughter, and realized just how much she'd perfected the art of deception. The weekend arrived, and Claire had plans to meet up with her girlfriends, or so she said. She dressed up, looking the same as she had on countless other nights, a picture-perfect wife going out for a harmless night of fun. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before she left, like it was just another night in our lives. I watched her drive away, the knot in my stomach tightening as I waited for her to disappear down the street. As soon as she was gone, I went into action. I had a friend who was familiar with tracking technology, and he'd helped me set up a GPS app on her phone. I knew it was drastic, but the uncertainty was eating away at me. I needed to know where she was going and, more importantly, who she was with. The app was simple enough to use, and within minutes, I saw her location updating on my phone screen. She was heading out of town, not toward her usual spots with her friends. I followed the dot on the map, my heart pounding as I watched her location stop in a part of town that was entirely unfamiliar. I felt a rush of adrenaline and decided to go see for myself. I got into my car and drove, the world around me blurring as I focused solely on reaching that pin on the map. I couldn't believe I was doing this, following my own wife like some character in a noir film. But the need for truth pushed me forward, drowning out every other thought. When I reached the location, I parked a few blocks away and walked, my hands shaking slightly as I approached the address. It was a small, dimly lit bar, the kind of place that felt secluded and hidden from the world. Through the window, I spotted her at a table near the back, laughing and leaning forward toward a man I'd never seen before. My stomach twisted as I took in the scene, her hand casually resting on his arm as they talked with an ease that felt too intimate, too familiar. I turned and walked back to my car, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Seeing her like that, so openly affectionate with another man, made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't just suspicion or paranoia, this was betrayal in its rawest form, out in the open for anyone to see. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel as I let the anger settle into something colder, more calculated. I wasn't going to let her see me fall apart. No, I was going to play this out, gather every shred of evidence, and make sure that when the time came, I'd be ready to face her with the full force of what I knew. This was no longer about catching her in a lie, it was about reclaiming control of my life and my future. As I drove home that night, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I had the truth, and I had a plan. Back at home, I walked through the front door, moving quietly so as not to wake the kids. The house was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, the sound echoing in the empty room, and took a long breath. Tonight had solidified what I had already suspected, but seeing Claire with that man, laughing, leaning into him as if she were free of the commitments she'd made to me and our family, had added a sharp edge to my resolve. The next morning, Claire returned home with her usual bright smile, greeting the kids and telling me all about her night out with the girls. She wove her story effortlessly, a tale of dinner, dancing, and gossip that left her too tired to drive home last night. I listened, nodding, as she crafted a fiction where everything was innocent, our life untouched by betrayal. The ease with which she spun her lies would have stunned me, but now, it only fueled my determination. After breakfast, I excused myself, telling her I needed to run some errands. I went straight to my lawyer, Karen, with all the evidence I'd gathered. Karen's eyes scanned the files, receipts, phone logs, photos, her mouth pressing into a thin line. "This is solid," she said, finally looking up. "You're in a strong position, especially if you want to go after primary custody and protect your assets." North Carolina considers fault in cases of infidelity, which will help if she tries to fight the settlement. The words hit me with a strange sense of finality. This was no longer just a suspicion, it was a legal case, something that would end our marriage with the cold logic of evidence and consequences. It felt surreal, watching my life be reduced to documents and strategies, but in a way, it was empowering. I had something concrete, a path forward that I could follow without falling apart. Karen went over the plan with me again, carefully outlining each step. She would prepare the papers and file them when I gave the word. But until then, she advised me to keep things calm and under wraps. Maintain the appearance of normalcy for now, she said. The more evidence you gather without confrontation, the stronger your case will be. Don't give her any warning. I thanked her, feeling the weight of the plan settle on my shoulders as I left her office. In a way, Karen's advice felt like armor, a shield that would protect me in the months ahead. I'd stay calm, keep my composure, and let Claire dig her own grave. Back at home, I threw myself into the routines that kept our family moving. I helped the kids with their homework, took them to soccer practices and piano lessons, and played the role of the supportive husband, watching Claire out of the corner of my eye. I became hyper-aware of every word she said, every excuse, every unguarded moment. The cracks in her facade became more obvious, her guilt slipping through the gaps when she thought no one was watching. Sometimes she would stumble over her words when I asked her about a meeting or a late night out, and I saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, as if she were constantly second-guessing the lie she'd crafted. A few weeks later, another one of her business trips came up. I had expected it, watching her pull together the same nervous energy that always preceded her departures. She packed her bags with forced cheer, telling the kids she'd miss them and that she'd bring back souvenirs. When she came to kiss me goodbye, I stiffened involuntarily, the effort to keep up the facade growing harder by the day. As soon as she left, I set my plan into motion. I'd already secured access to her accounts and tracked her phone location. Now, I wanted to go deeper. I combed through her social media, finding subtle clues she probably thought I'd never notice, posts that matched up with times she'd claimed to be somewhere else, check-ins she had deleted shortly after posting. She was careful, but not careful enough. The GPS showed her heading south, far from the city where she claimed her conference was being held. I watched as the dot moved to a small resort town, stopping at a location near the coast. It was a quaint seaside inn, the kind that specialized in weekend getaways for couples looking for a secluded escape. Just the sight of it on the map made my blood boil, but I steadied myself, reminding myself that my patience would pay off. With the kids at school, I made the drive down to the inn, taking a different route to avoid raising suspicion. I checked into a nearby motel, laying low while keeping an eye on her location. Sure enough, as night fell, I saw the dot shift from the inn to a nearby restaurant. I parked discreetly in the lot across the street and watched from a distance as she walked in, her arm linked with the man I'd seen her with before. They were smiling, leaning into each other with a warmth and familiarity that was nauseating to watch. My first instinct was to confront her, to walk right up to their table and expose her lies. But I held back, the thought of Karen's words echoing in my mind, "Don't give her any warning." Instead, I took photos, capturing the scene from afar. Each snap of the camera felt like a blow, both to my pride and to the life I thought we had. But the anger fueled me, hardening my resolve. I would get through this, no matter what. The next day, I returned home, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in my bones. Waiting for her to come back felt like torture, knowing she would walk in with her bright, cheery smile, acting as though nothing was amiss. When she finally arrived, she was full of stories, tales of networking sessions, and keynote speakers, her lie spun seamlessly as if she'd rehearsed it 100 times. Days turned into weeks, and I followed the routine with grim determination. Each time she left, I tracked her, documenting every stop, every lie. I found evidence of gifts she'd purchased for him, dinners she'd charged to her card, even a few love notes tucked away in her purse. Each piece of evidence was another thread, slowly weaving together the full picture of her deception. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. Claire was in the kitchen, humming as she prepped dinner, the picture of domestic bliss. But when she left her phone on the counter to answer a call from the other room, I couldn't resist. I picked it up, scrolling quickly through her recent messages. It didn't take long to find the one she hadn't deleted, a string of texts from him, each one a reminder of the life she was leading behind my back. The last message sealed it: "Can't wait to see you again next weekend. I've missed you." The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my chest, each word cutting deeper. I put the phone down before she returned, my decision made. I was done playing the silent observer, done gathering evidence. I had everything I needed. The next morning, I called Karen and told her to file the papers. We went over the custody plan, securing the house, and outlining the steps to ensure I wouldn't lose more than I already had. The wheels were in motion, and the only thing left was to tell Claire. When I returned home that evening, I kept my expression neutral, waiting for the right moment. Claire came into the living room after putting the kids to bed, her face soft with a contentment that made me feel sick. I could hardly believe how comfortable she was in her web of lies, sitting there next to me as if everything were perfect. "Claire," I said, my voice steady but cold. She looked up, surprised at my tone. "We need to talk." The color drained from her face as she met my gaze, sensing that something had shifted. For the first time in weeks, she seemed unsure, her composure faltering as she nodded, her eyes wide with a silent question. She didn't yet know what I had found, but the fear creeping into her expression was enough to tell me she understood this wasn't just another conversation. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had waited long enough. Claire sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on her lap, bracing herself for whatever I was about to say. I watched her, this woman I'd once trusted with everything, who now looked back at me with a fragile innocence that had become a stranger's mask. It took all my restraint not to let my anger rise, but I kept myself calm, feeling the weight of the decision I'd made pressing down on me. "Claire," I began, my voice steady. "I know about everything." Her eyes widened, and I could see the flicker of realization dawning, the understanding that her web of lies had finally unraveled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, her lips parted in a silent plea, a flash of desperation cutting through her careful facade. "I know about him," I continued, each word deliberate. "The trips, the nights out, the messages, everything." I held her gaze, watching as her defenses fell away, replaced by raw, unfiltered fear. For a moment, there was silence, thick and heavy. Then she swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want it to happen like this," she said, her words faltering. "Really?" I said, the calm in my tone masking the storm beneath. "Then how did you want it to happen, Claire? Were you waiting for me to find out? Or were you planning to leave eventually?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "It just happened. I don't have an excuse, and I'm so sorry, but," she trailed off, her words hanging in the air, hollow and weightless. The apology, if that's what it was, did nothing to ease the bitterness that had built up in me. I felt an urge to unleash everything I'd been holding in, to demand explanations, to make her feel every ounce of betrayal she'd inflicted. But the desire for vengeance had faded, replaced by a cold clarity. "We're done, Claire," I said, my voice firm. "I've already filed for divorce. I spoke to a lawyer, and everything is in place." She gasped, her face crumbling as the reality of what I was saying took hold. "Wait, no, please," she stammered, reaching out as if to grab onto something solid. "We can work this out, can't we?" I shook my head. "You didn't give me a choice, Claire. You made this decision when you chose him over us. Over me. There's no coming back from this." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I remembered everything, the late nights, the lies, the way she had come home to our children as though nothing was amiss, all while leading a double life. This was her consequence, her reality, and I wouldn't let her turn it back on me. "Please," she whispered, desperation coloring her voice. "I'll do anything. Just, don't take the kids. Don't take everything away from me." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of calm. "The kids will be staying with me, and you'll have visitation. I'm not doing this to punish you, but I won't let them be raised by someone who thought this kind of deceit was acceptable." She stared at me, her expression crumbling as she took in the finality of my words. The silence stretched on, her face now a mix of heartbreak and something else, a glint of anger, perhaps, or resentment. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved, but it was quickly replaced by a stranger's face, a stranger's lies. Finally, she nodded, her face a mask of resignation. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "If this is what you want." The next few days passed in a blur. Claire moved out, gathering her things with a quiet acceptance that felt almost eerie. I watched her pack her bags, moving through our home like a ghost, saying her goodbyes to the kids with forced smiles and tear-filled eyes. She left without another word, and just like that, a chapter of my life closed, leaving a strange emptiness in its wake. But as the dust settled, I began to rebuild, focusing on the kids and finding new routines that felt like stability again. I found comfort in small things, the laughter of my children, the quiet of the house, the sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. Each day, I felt stronger, more certain of the choice I'd made. Weeks passed, and Claire's visits became less frequent. She seemed to fade into the background, her life moving forward without us, without me. I didn't dwell on her absence, I'd come to accept that some chapters are best left closed. Then, one day, I received an unexpected call. It was Claire, her voice quiet, hesitant. "Can we meet? There's something I need to talk to you about." Curious and wary, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, and I watched her walk in, looking fragile and uncertain, a shadow of the woman I once knew. She sat down, avoiding my gaze, fidgeting with her hands. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve this, but there's something you should know." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I found out recently that, well, it wasn't just a fling, this affair. It was part of something bigger, something that, I didn't understand at the time." "What are you talking about?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. She hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "The man I was seeing, he wasn't just some random guy. He was part of an investigation. He was working for someone who wanted to know more about you. Someone with an interest in your business." A cold shock rippled through me. "What? Claire, are you saying you were being used?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "At first, I thought it was just an affair. But he kept asking questions, probing for information about your work, your contacts. I didn't understand why until recently. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it until it was too late." My mind raced, piecing together what she was saying. All those moments, the secrecy, the lies, was it all part of something darker? I felt a strange, sinking feeling in my stomach, a realization that went beyond betrayal. This wasn't just a broken marriage, it was something more sinister, something that threatened to unravel everything I'd built. I stared at her, barely able to process her words. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" She shook her head, her voice a choked whisper. "I was ashamed. And I thought maybe I could fix it on my own. But it's too late now. I just wanted you to know. I wanted to tell you the truth." I left the cafe in a daze, her words echoing in my mind. The betrayal I'd felt seemed small compared to this revelation. I had been a target, a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. I realized, standing there in the street, that this was far from over. As I walked back to my car, a single thought rose above the chaos: the fight wasn't behind me, it was just beginning.